Hello, my name is Fritz Kainz, and I'm here to talk with you today about how to impart the basics of oral advocacy in the context of the Jessup competition. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna, for which I also competed a long time ago at the Jessup, and whose Jessup team I coached twice. I know from experience that coaching a Jessup team is hard work, and that it requires a lot of intellectual and also emotional resources. So I want to thank you for undertaking to do that in the upcoming competition. I want to share with you today several takeaways from my experience in how to get teams up to speed on oral advocacy. Before we start though, maybe a quick background and caveat as to how my experience might relate to your work. At my university, students often come to the Jessup with no prior mooting experience at all. More broadly speaking, they often lack any public speaking experience or debating experience, at least in the English language. So you can imagine that you have to get them up to speed in a matter of weeks or months to be viable in the competition. What I can talk to you about today is how to build these foundations quickly. It should go without saying that this relates to how to deliver argument and not with the substantive points of legal argument that you might encounter at the Jessup. However, what I have encountered is that participants, when they practice up at the podium or when they are in an actual round, often feel overwhelmed by the many things that they have to think about at once. In addition to thinking about the substantive points, they have to think about where to place their hands, their feet, where to look, how to talk. By practicing away some of these performance-related aspects, you can allow your participants to think about to free up mental capacity to think about the substance of their legal argument when they are up there, and not to worry about the performance-related aspects. Now, the method used for achieving this is pretty simple, and it might be familiar to you if you practice an instrument or something of the like. It requires to go through each aspect of an oral argument, of the performance, so to say, and practice each aspect in a way that it almost becomes second nature. And only when oralists have internalized this aspect, then you combine it with other aspects. Now, what are the aspects of oral advocacy at the Jessup competition? You can find them in this document, the Oral Rounds Score Sheet. This is used by judges to score rounds, but it is not less important for coaches or participants. And if you haven't familiarized yourselves yet with this document, I would highly encourage you to do so. It provides kind of an official key into how to rack up points and by extension, how to win rounds in this competition. Of course, judges are not machines and they don't always go machine-like by the roster of points that you find in there. However, as I hope you will see, especially the aspects of oral advocacy that we will discuss today are pivotal to not only achieving points on the paper, but to convincing judges that your team is a team that knows what it is talking about, that it knows the unwritten rules on how to behave in an oral round. After that, your legal arguments will pack even more punch than I'm sure they're already doing. Okay, so when you go through the oral round score sheet, you will see that 4 out of the 5 categories that you get points for are related to the substantive aspects of the argument in some way or another. The only aspect, the only category that is not, is called style, poise, and demeanor. And it is this category that we will talk about today. It says here, quote, conveys formality, respect, and professionalism while maintaining a conversational and engaged tone. Maintains posture and eye contact with the full bench, unquote. As you can see, the style, poise, and demeanor category has a lot of things to worry about. And as we said before, participants already feel overwhelmed by the many things they have to worry about. So it is really pivotal here to go through these things separately and to look at them separately and to practice them separately. The first step to doing this is to get rid of distracting elements in your practice. And that includes, maybe surprisingly, the law. I usually start oral phase preparation by making participants plead a non-legal text that they are already familiar with, that is not related to the case at all, such as a speech, a poem, or even a song. However, in doing so, they have to stick to, as far as possible, to the formal style as expected at a Jessup pleading. That means that they can focus on maintaining proper style, poise, and demeanor and are not distracted by thinking about legal questions. Additionally, to have the best effect, I would recommend to tape every session, especially the first ones, even if they are not law related, and send a copy to your participants. That way they can understand your feedback points better and incorporate them at home. All right, now what does style, poise, and demeanor entail? In general here, there's no way around looking at good oralists from the past. And luckily, Ilse has made available on YouTube prior Jessup finals from last years or even decades that you can look at. Here, I can give you a few points on what to look out for in your practice sessions with your teams. First, always remember that this category is the first and the last to be judged by the judges. Once the judges enter the room, and ideally even before, your team should be in advocacy mode. Even while not pleading at the podium, and sometimes especially when not pleading at the podium, your team members should sit straight at the counsel table and limit their movements to a minimum. The rules already prohibit any kind of oral communication, but you should also keep any kind of written communication to a minimum, to what is really required. Now, especially in practice pleadings, your team members will sometimes get bored and not maintain proper style. When that happens, shoot them an admonishing look or find some other way to get their attention. This is really something that should be internalized, even though it is a long time that they sometimes have to sit at the counsel table. Second, the approach from the counsel table to the podium. This should be in a measured but determined stride. And this maybe sounds simple, but if you're wearing formal shoes and carrying a big folder, this becomes not so simple very quickly. So I would recommend from the very beginning, even if your team is just pleading a poem or a song, to work with a folder, to have to carry the folder to become familiar with it, and try different forms of podiums because I can assure you that you will encounter different forms of podiums when you are in the competition. Third, the stance at the podium. This is literally speaking the foundation of delivering good oral argument. Oralists should place their feet at around shoulder width. In my experience, this allows a good balance between conveying formality, but also being sure of their stance. Unfortunately, especially when stressed by questions or by something else during the round, a lot of oralists tend to shuffle their feet around or lift their feet or something like that. That is not only distracting, especially when you're dealing with a glass podium, when judges can notice that, but it has effects on the whole body, as you can imagine, and it additionally stresses the oralist. How can you counter that? The problem is that most of the time, an oralist doesn't even notice that they're shuffling their feet. So I would recommend working with some kind of physical aid, such as weights or tape. When there is some resistance to the feet, oralists quickly realize what they are doing and they can counter their movements. Usually, using this kind of method, after 2 or 3 practice pleadings, the feet problem go away. Now, fourth, we're moving up to the upper body and the hands. As I already said, getting rid of the feet problem usually also gets rid of any kind of swaying of the upper body because it provides a good foundation. However, it is still good to look out for this. The hands, on the other side, are something that is allowed to move a bit more freely during an oral argument and even expected to do so. In fact, gestures, such as when using enumerations or metaphors or something like that, can be very powerful tools for an oralist. They are usually your only physical aid in communicating something difficult to the judges. However, there are different schools of judges in how much gesturing they like, and to be on the safe side, I would recommend to keep gestures to a minimum. I would work with your team to determine for each participant what is their dominant gesturing hand and to stick mostly to this one hand. Additionally, gestures should usually not leave an imaginary box that at the lower end is delimited by the podium, at the sides and at the top by the shoulders. Fifth, we're moving up to the head, and as you can by now imagine, head movements should also be kept to a minimum. This ties in with the next point. If you're using head movements, it should be used to sway, to sweep the bench with your eyes or with your head, and not to look up and down from the podium. Sixth, eye contact. And this is something I have struggled with in all my time as oralist. But it is pivotal that an oralist should look at the judges at all times. They should only really look down at the binder when they are asked by judges to provide a direct quotation, when they're asked to read something off their prepared materials. However, and this unfortunately tends to happen more often with the better prepared oralists, a lot of oralists tend to look down on their papers because it is a kind of happy place for them to go when they are stressed. They know that they have put a lot of research into it, and they know that the answer to some question is there. As you will see in advanced parts of the preparation, usually your oralists will already know the answers even without having to look down. So to practice not looking down at the binder too much, I would recommend doing binderless pleadings, at least at an advanced stage of the preparations. This means that your oralists will not have anything to look down to, that they will have to do it completely from memory, and that they don't have this happy place to go down to on their binder anymore. They're forced to look at the judges when answering questions or when delivering their prepared statements. Now, in my experience, these pleadings tend to be the most forceful ones and the best ones. Unfortunately, oralists usually dislike them. Now, seventh and lastly, the oralist's voice. This can be one of the hardest parts to pull off, especially when under stress, when in a hostile Q&A session or something like that. However, this is also something where oralists can bring most of their own personality into their style. Eventually, they will have to find their own style and how to deliver the argument. But again, here's no way around looking at old Jessup finals and very good oralists from the past to get some inspiration. I will only leave you with 2 points on what to watch out for in oralists' voices. First, and this ties in with eye contact, oralists obviously should not read off the page. But even when they have memorized something, it should not sound memorized. Remember the score sheet. It should sound conversational for most of the time, at least, especially when in a Q&A session. So I would recommend going binderless at some point, but also trying different styles if your oralists are struggling with sounding too much like they're just rattling off a memorized statement. Second, in my experience, oralists usually tend to become too fast rather than too slow, especially in Q&A sessions. For this reason, as for many other reasons, it is highly advisable to prep individual questions and lines of questioning, especially very hostile ones and especially on weak points. Because judges will know when an oralist on the podium doesn't want to talk about something because they want to hurry out of it or they hear it for the first time or something like that. Of course, this shouldn't happen, but you should prepare your oralists for this kind of situation. So really practice hostile questions, practice them over and over again. And again, not to arrive at some kind of memorized statement that they can just rattle off when they're presented with a question, but that they have been in most questions, that they have heard most questions, or that they have familiarized themselves with hostile questioning and hot benches, and are not confronted with this kind of situation for the first time when they are up on the podium. With this, our little tour of the foundations of oral advocacy concludes. I hope that you have found something useful in it, and I wish you and your team best of luck for the upcoming competition. Thank you.